The U.S. annexation of Texas quickly led to diplomatic trouble with Mexico. Upon taking office in 1845, President Polk dispatched John Slidell as his special envoy to the government in Mexico City. Polk wanted Slidell to 1. Persuade Mexico to sell the California and New Mexico territories to the United States, and 2. Settle the disputed Mexico-Texas border. Slidell's mission failed on both accounts. The Mexican government refused to sell California and insisted that Texas's southern border was on the Nueces River. Polk and Slidell asserted that the border lay farther to the south along the Rio Grande. While Slidell waited for Mexico City's response to the U.S. offer, Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor to move his army toward the Rio Grande across territory claimed by Mexico. On April 24, 1846, a Mexican army crossed the Rio Grande and captured an American Army patrol, killing 11. Polk used the incident to justify sending his already prepared war message to Congress. Northern Whigs, among them a first-term Illinois representative named Abraham Lincoln, opposed going to war over the incident and doubted Polk's claim that American blood had been shed on American soil. Nevertheless, Whig protests were in vain. A large majority in both houses approved the war resolution. Most of the war was fought in Mexican territory by relatively small armies of Americans. Leading a force that never exceeded 1,500, General Stephen Kearny succeeded in taking Santa Fe, the New Mexico territory, and Southern California. Backed by only several dozen soldiers, a few Navy officers, and American civilians who had recently settled in California, John C. Fremont quickly overthrew Mexican rule in Northern California, which was about June 1846, and proclaimed California to be an independent republic with a bear on its flag, the so-called Bear Flag Republic, as we talked about before. Meanwhile, Zachary Taylor's force of 6,000 men drove the Mexican army from Texas across the Rio Grande into northern Mexico and won a major victory at Buena Vista in February 1847. President Polk then selected General Whitfield Scott to invade central Mexico. The army of 14,000 under Scott's command succeeded in taking the coastal city of Veracruz and then captured Mexico City in September of 1847. For Mexico, the war was a military disaster from the start, but the Mexican government was unwilling to sue for peace and concede the loss of its northern lands. Finally, after the fall of Mexico City, the government had little choice but to agree to U.S. terms. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, negotiated in Mexico by American diplomat Nicholas Trist, provided for the following. 1. Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas, and 2. The United States took possession of the former Mexican provinces of California and New Mexico, what is known as the Mexican Cession. For these territories, the United States paid $15 million and assumed responsibility for any claims of American citizens against Mexico. In the Senate, some Whigs opposed the treaty because they saw the war as an immoral effort to expand slavery. A few Southern Democrats disliked the treaty for opposite reasons. As expansionists, they wanted the United States to take all of Mexico. Nevertheless, the treaty was finally ratified in the Senate by the required 2/3 vote. U.S. entry into a war with Mexico provoked controversy from start to finish. In 1846, the first year of war, Pennsylvania Congressman David Wilmot proposed an appropriations bill be amended to forbid slavery in any of the new territories acquired from Mexico. The Wilmot Proviso, as it was called, passed the House twice, but was defeated in the Senate. By increasing tensions between the North and the South, the question has to be asked, did the war to acquire territories from Mexico lead inevitably to the American Civil War? Without question, the acquisition of the vast western lands did renew the sectional debate over the extension of slavery. Many Northerners viewed the war with Mexico as part of a Southern plot to extend the slave power. Some historians see the Wilmot Proviso as the first round in an escalating political conflict that led ultimately to civil war. Many Southerners were dissatisfied with the territorial gains from the Mexican War. In the early 1850s, they hoped to acquire new territories, especially in areas of Latin America where they thought plantations worked by slaves were economically feasible. The most tempting, eagerly sought possibility in the eyes of Southern expansionists was the acquisition of Cuba. President Polk offered to purchase Cuba from Spain for $100 million, but Spain refused to sell the last major remnant of its once glorious empire. Several Southern adventurers led small expeditions to Cuba in an effort to take the island by force of arms. These forays, however, were easily defeated, and those who participated were executed by Spanish firing squads. Elected to the presidency in 1852, Franklin Pierce adopted pro-Southern policies and dispatched 3 American diplomats to Ostend, Belgium, where they secretly negotiated to buy Cuba from Spain. The Ostend Manifesto that the diplomats drew up was leaked to the press in the United States and provoked an angry reaction from anti-slavery members of Congress. President Pierce was forced to drop the scheme. Expansionists continued to seek new empires with or without the federal government's support. Southern adventurer William Walker had tried unsuccessfully to take Baja California from Mexico in 1853. Then leading a force mostly of Southerners, he took over Nicaragua in 1855. Walker's regime even gained temporary recognition from the United States in 1856. However, his grandiose scheme to develop a pro-slavery Central American empire collapsed when a coalition of Central American countries invaded and defeated him. Walker was executed by Honduran authorities in 1860. Another American ambition was to build a canal through Central America. Great Britain had the same ambition. To prevent each other from seizing this opportunity on its own, Great Britain and the United States agreed to the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty of 1850. It provided that neither nation would attempt to take exclusive control of any future canal route in Central America. This treaty continued in force until the end of the century. A new treaty signed in 1901 gave the United States a free hand to build a canal without British participation, which of course, as we know, becomes the Panama Canal. Although he failed to acquire Cuba, President Pierce succeeded in adding a strip of land to the American Southwest for a railroad. In 1853, Mexico agreed to sell thousands of acres of semi-desert land to the United States for $10 million. Known as the Gadsden Purchase, the land forms the southern sections of present-day New Mexico and Arizona. From 1855 until 1870, the issues of Union slavery, Civil War, and post-war Reconstruction would overshadow the drive to acquire new territory. Even so, Manifest Destiny continued to be an important force for shaping U.S. policy in 1867. For example, Secretary of State William Seward succeeded in purchasing Alaska at a time when the nation was just recovering from the Civil War. Lastly, let's look at settlement of the Western Territories. Following the peaceful acquisition of Oregon and the more violent acquisition of California, the migration of Americans into these lands began in earnest. The arid area between the Mississippi Valley and the Pacific Coast was popularly known as, in the 1850s and 1860s as the Great American Desert. Immigrants passed quickly over this vast dry region to reach the more inviting lands on the West Coast. Therefore, California and Oregon were settled several decades before people attempted to farm the Great Plains. Fur traders known as mountain men were the earliest non-native individuals to open the far west. In the 1820s, they held yearly rendezvous in the Rockies with American Indians to trade for animal skins. James Beckwourth, Jim Bridger, and Kit Carson and Jedediah Smith were among the hardy band of explorers and trappers who provided much of the early information about trails and frontier conditions to later settlers. After the mountain men, a much larger group of pioneers made the hazardous journey west in hopes of clearing the forests and farming and fertile valleys of California and Oregon. By 1860, hundreds of thousands had reached their westward goal by following the Oregon, California, Santa Fe, and Mormon trails. The long and arduous trek usually began in St. Joseph or Independence, Missouri, or in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and followed the river valleys through the Great Plains. Inching along at only 15 miles a day, a wagon train needed months to finally reach the foothills of the Rockies or face the hardships of the southwestern desert. The final life or death challenge was to get through the mountain passes of the Sierras and Cascades before the first heavy snow. While pioneers feared attacks by American Indians, the most common and serious dangers were disease and depression from the harsh everyday conditions on the trail. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 set off the first of many migrations to mineral-rich mountains of the West. Gold or silver rushes occurred in Colorado, Nevada, and the Black Hills of the Dakotas and other Western territories. The mining boom brought tens of thousands of men into the Western mountains. Mining camps and towns, many of them short-lived, sprang up wherever a strike was reported. Largely as a result of the gold rush, California's population soared from a mere 14,000 in 1848 to 380,000 by 1860. Booms attracted miners from all around the world. By the 1860s, almost one-third of the miners in the West were Chinese. Most pioneer families moved west to start homesteads and begin farming. Congress's preemption acts of the 1830s and 1840s gave squatters rights to settle public lands and purchase them for low prices once the government put them up for sale. In addition, the government made it easier for settlers by offering parcels of land as small as 40 acres for sale. However, moving west was not for the penniless. A family needed at least $200 to $300 to make the overland trip, which eliminated many of the poor. The trek to California and Oregon was largely a middle-class movement. The isolation of the frontier made life for pioneers especially difficult during the first years, but rural communities soon developed. The institutions that the people established, like schools, churches, clubs, political parties, were modeled after those they had known in the East, or for immigrants from abroad in their native lands. And lastly, Western cities that arose as a result of railroads, mineral wealth, and farming attracted a number of professionals and business owners. For example, San Francisco and Denver became instant cities created by the gold and silver rushes. Salt Lake City grew because it offered fresh supplies to travelers on overland trails for the balance of their western journey. Okay, and lastly, our essential question or questions. To what extent did territorial expansion during the 1840s to 1857 coincide with economic growth in America? And elaborate as to the causes of the Panic of 1857 and how the panic affected each region, meaning the North, West, and South.